Our next item of business is a statement by Mary McCallan on the phone-free classrooms. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. So I call Mary McCallan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My priority, Presiding Officer, is to ensure that our school environments support pupils to thrive and to reach their full potential. There is no doubt that new and evolving technologies can provide opportunities for learning and for communication. However, they also bring the risk of a spectrum of harm. We need to recognise the negative impact of mobile phones and screen time and, frankly, protect our children and young people from that. That is why now is the time for phone-free learning environments. Presiding Officer, I'm pleased that there is cross-party consensus on this issue and that we can work together on it. We owe it to our pupils and to our teachers to do so and to create an environment which is conducive to learning and to teaching. This government has already been clear that any school or education authority that wishes to introduce restrictions on mobile phones in their classrooms or across the school estate has Minister's full support. This is the position in our national guidance, introduced in 2024, in response to the Behaviour in Scottish Schools research of 2023, which highlighted the disruption that mobile phones were causing in our classrooms. Since we introduced this guidance, many schools and education authorities have acted to restrict the use of mobile phones, and I welcome that. But there is too much variability. We have listened carefully to the calls from parents, carers and teachers to ensure greater consistency across the country to support children's learning and their development. We continue to hear concerns about classroom disruption, where restrictions are absent, and wider impacts on pupils' well-being from excessive screen time, exposure to harmful online content and the effects of online bullying. Presiding Officer, that's why we will shortly publish a consultation on legislation to make our learning environments phone-free, meeting our commitment to do so in the first 100 days of this government. Last week, in one of my first visits to a school as Education Secretary, I visited James Gillespie's High School, where I met with staff and with young people to discuss their mobile phone policy. The school has a very clear policy of no phones on school grounds during school hours. This includes campus, classroom, corridors and the cafeteria. The rules for their young people are clear. See it, hear it, lose it. The staff and the young people with whom I spoke to separately, they highlighted the benefits to me, including fewer distractions during class, reduced conflict between pupils and between staff and pupils, and more interaction between peers. The young people with whom, as I say, I spoke separately, they simply reflected to me how much they welcomed the break from the otherwise addictive apps and content. I want to hear more from pupils through our consultation. Scotland has been a pioneer in the advancement of rights of children and young people, and it's vital that their views be front and centre in the decisions that we take. We also want to understand the range of views from parents and carers, from school staff, from education authorities and interested organisations. Their views will help shape our legislation and allow us to deal with a number of complex issues. For example, as our current guidance makes clear, there will be occasions where exemptions are required, such as where young people use their phones to monitor medical conditions, or for young carers who need to maintain contact with home. Schools who have already implemented phone-free policies per our guidance are already managing this well. We will fully explore and understand all of these issues to inform sensible legislation. And legislation is the only way we can mandate learning environments to be phone-free. But until then, existing guidance allows all schools to introduce this policy now. Therefore, Presiding Officer, to signal our intent that schools should move to introduce restrictions whilst we prepare legislation, we're working with education authorities to refresh our current guidance to support and encourage more schools to introduce restrictions ahead of a law change. And again, we are working with the Scottish Advisory Group on Relationships and Behaviours in Schools, meaning the updated guidance will be informed by the views of organisations including COSLA, the Association of Directors of Education, the main teaching unions and parents and carers, representatives, as well, crucially, as the views of young people. The guidance will set out expectations on key areas, including engagement with the whole school community, pupils, staff and families, which is required to build support for policies. I'm very pleased to inform the Chamber that this updated guidance will be published by the end of this month to support schools to consider their approach from the beginning of the next term. And, Presiding Officer, I want to be clear that this issue rests within a wider public health approach to online harm that the Government is committed to. We recognise a spectrum of harm associated with the significant intensification that we've seen in children and young people's use of online platforms and smartphones. This spectrum includes, but is not limited to, the loss of concentration and wasting precious childhood years at one end, through the absorption of harmful, often violent, misogynistic or radicalising content, right through to incitement to self-harm, extreme bullying and, in some cases, grooming. A public health approach means being clear about the harms and taking a holistic approach to address them. Therefore, when considering the impact of mobile phones in schools, we must think not only about the distraction in the classroom or bullying during the school day, but also the higher risk of depression, of anxiety, of poor sleep and poor health in adolescents that can arise from smartphone use. A public health approach means engaging the whole school community so that schools can create the right conditions to get it right. Right for school well-being, for learning outcomes and for long-term health. And I want to be clear that schools are only one part of the solution. I wish to highlight action that we are taking to support parents and young people to ensure that social media companies are held to account. Whilst the main policy and legislative levers, such as the Online Safety Act, are held by the UK Government, in Scotland we are taking all available steps to act here and now whilst we wait for the UK Government to step up. And let me be clear, we do support the UK Government's consultation on the banning of social media for under-16s, but we also don't think that will solve the problem of online harms. We need more concerted action to force social media and tech giants to do more to protect our children, and that is a fight that I will not shy away from. We've also already taken action to provide guidance for parents of younger children and babies, publishing advice on our Parent Club website for parents of children aged under 5 on screen time, and this is in line with the World Health Organisation's guidance. And we continue to fund resources such as the Mind Your Time work, which gives children and young people advice on social media use, on screen time, on sleep, and their impact on body image and mental well-being. We will now build on this work by funding a national public health campaign to make young people and their families aware of how to use social media, screen time and online time in a safe and healthy manner, and that might mean not using it at all, Presiding Officer. We need families to be aware of the harmful consequences and the risks to mental health and to sleep and to body image, as well as the benefits of spending time with friends and family in real life. And parents must be supported in this, Presiding Officer, never shamed. We will also use the example of Ireland's successful Pause Before You Post campaign to make parents and carers aware of the potential harms of what's called sharenting, sharing images and details of their children on social media that can be pieced together and inadvertently create a digital footprint for young people. So this is action that we can and are taking now, but Scotland does not currently have the powers to act in areas such as the regulation of internet services. So we will take steps to push the UK Government to take more action, including ensuring that Ofcom uses its powers to hold tech companies and social media providers to account. Regulation has fallen substantially behind where it needs to be. We will advocate for a social media levy on companies to invest in programmes to support safer online engagement for young people, improving mental health and supporting online literacy. I was also very interested in the comments of the former UK Safeguarding Minister, who in her resignation letter to the Prime Minister said that she had solutions that would end the ability of children in the UK to take naked pictures of themselves on every phone and device in the country. Presiding Officer, if this technology exists, it must be rolled out without delay. The Children's Minister, Siobhan Brown, has written to the new Safeguarding Minister to ask about this technology, to confirm our support for such a move and to reiterate our desire to work closely with the UK Government on the important issue of safeguarding. Presiding Officer, our children and young people are growing up in an online world which was unimaginable 20 years ago when I was at school and recall the first smartphones emerging then. The rapid evolution of technology means that our thinking must also adapt. This Government is clear that a public health approach to response to these changes is appropriate. Creating phone-free learning environments is an important part of this holistic approach. Our schools should be safe and nurturing environments for our children and young people where they can learn free from the distractions of mobile phones. And teachers will benefit from this too. So I look forward to working constructively with members on this issue and the wider issues of freeing our children from intensifying online harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow about 20 minutes for questions, after which we will move to the next item. I would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons now. Call Angela Ross.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And thank you for your speech, Cabinet Secretary. We do support the ban of mobile phones in schools, and that's to help ensure focus in classrooms and support teachers in delivering lessons. And I do appreciate the level of consultation that has occurred as well. I'm quite impressed to see how much work has gone into that. I do think that's the right approach and the right way forward. I do want to look at, on an ongoing basis, how do we ensure that policy is delivered effectively? And by that, I mean we're having a ban and we're stopping something from occurring, but we do need to support the delivery in a way that will allow staff to have autonomy and control within their classrooms and to have the right to ensure the appropriate discipline and consequences are in place. So how do we get the balance right between providing all of this support and resources and allowing a level of autonomy within classroom and schools?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks, Presiding Officer, and I thank Angela Ross for her question and for her support for the policy, and I hope that that's something we can continue to garner right across the Chamber. I want to also acknowledge her comments about the preparedness and the preparations that have gone into this, and I would pay credit to my predecessor in the education portfolio, to the DFM Jenny Gilruth, for the very considered manner that this policy has been adopted and gotten us to this stage. Angela Ross is quite right to ask about flexibility. I think one of the problems with the current situation and why we need to move to change the law is because some schools have adopted it, others haven't, and that variability across the country will be letting some pupils down. So we can't have that and we have to correct it, but flexibility will continue to be an important aspect. The guidance as it stands allows for school-appropriate flexibility, including, for example, whether it applies in the classroom or whole campus, what exemptions might be made available. And I think the other thing that's really critical to making this work practically, which is Angela Ross's question, is the whole school community approach to its development. So the heads of schools, teachers, working with parents and carers, and crucially working with young people. And certainly when I visited James Gillespie, they had really put a great deal of emphasis on the whole school community's buy-in to the policy, and it was bearing fruit in terms of its implementation.
Thank you. I call Catherine Sangster to be followed by Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for advance notice of the statement. We welcome the Scottish Government's commitment to making progress on mobile-free classrooms, as Scottish Labour campaigned on this for some time, and it was found to be hugely popular with parents. Can the Cabinet Secretary give the Chamber some detail about when the consultation will open, when it will end, and when the legislation will be brought forward? It was really positive to hear about your visit to James Gillespie High School and your keenness that schools roll this out now, but what support and guidance will be given to head teachers who wish to remove phones from classrooms when perhaps they face obstacles, or how do we ensure that we're sharing best practice?
Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks, Presiding Officer, and I thank Catherine Sangster for her question. I would reflect a similar experience. You know, she mentioned having spoken with a number of parents who are keen to see this carefully developed policy move to the next stage and move to a nationwide position. I've also had that experience. Most teachers that I spoke with in a constituency capacity prior to coming into this role also have reflected that desire for a central position, and that's what the Government is now moving to deliver. She's right to ask about timelines. In the first 100 days of this Government, we have committed to both opening the consultation on the legislation and publishing the updated guidance, which we are encouraging schools to adopt now in advance of the change of the law.
I call Patricia Gibson to be followed by David Kirkwood.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement as a former English teacher of 25 years' experience. I have front-line experience of how disruptive and distracting mobile phones in classrooms can be to the teaching and learning process, as well as causing a whole range of harms to which the Cabinet Secretary has alluded. And many teachers have longed for a statutory ban to be put in place and will also welcome these measures. But can the Cabinet Secretary tell us what powers and support she envisages schools will be able to access in enforcing a ban on phones in classrooms, especially in view of the fact that there could well be some parental pushback beyond any exemptions in place, as has been reported recently in some parts of the country where schools have tried to enforce these bans?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank Patricia Gibson for her question, and it's not at all daunting to have a former teacher both sitting next to me and over my shoulder. But it helps to stress the point of how much I am hoping that we can deliver this change in the law in a way that takes on the views of the teaching profession, parliamentarians across the chamber, parents and carers, and of course our teaching unions and local authorities. I recognise that there are different aspects of this that each school will have to seek to overcome. I've alluded to some of them already, whether it's a classroom ban or whether it's a campus ban. I have to say personally, I saw a campus ban working really well at James Gillespie's. The teachers and the young people reflected to me that not only serves the purpose of helping to remove distractions in the classroom, but it also frees the young people from what we know can be malign influence of the online world throughout their day. And some of the young people reflected to me that because it had been off in their bag, increasingly when they were going home, they weren't turning it back on as quickly as they might have before. So again, sort of breaking that, the addictiveness that we know tech companies build into many of their platforms. So I suppose in response to Patricia Gibson, flexibility will be built in. We will be consulting really carefully on what everybody involved thinks needs to be reflected in the eventual law change. But I am really keen, Presiding Officer, that what we have finally passed in the Chamber will reflect, I think, the gravity of the potential harm that could be impacting our young people, and operates as a bit of a line in the sand for how we see the correct use of smartphones in the online world for our young people.
David Kirkwood to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Congratulations on your election, and Cabinet Secretary also. Congratulations on yours. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that since many teachers are already implementing their own de facto bans on smartphone use in the classrooms, many more would appreciate the formalisation of such a ban, thus removing the onus from them?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks to Mr Kirkwood for his question. I think I reflected this in my response to Catherine Sangster, that certainly anecdotally and in a constituency capacity, parents and teachers had reflected to me that a national position would be helpful. Of course, in the development of this policy, we have been clear that we don't have the powers to unilaterally implement a ban across the country, and that's why a law change is now required, and that's what we're now working towards. But I would return to the point about the variability. I think that's probably the main thing that we couldn't tolerate as a Parliament and as a society, the idea that some pupils in our schools would be learning free from the influence of smartphones whilst others wouldn't. And I think there is a lot of consensus around this area. Provided that we can get the framework right, I think that we will, as a Parliament, enjoy quite a lot of support from the public on this.
I call Fulton McGregor to be followed by Jenny Young.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I also welcome you to your role. As doctors have recently warned that social media can be just as harmful to children as smoking, I also welcome the Scottish Government's action to introduce phone-free classrooms and mitigate the impact of phone use and learning. Can the Cabinet Secretary set out what more can be done to tackle the harms of social media in the classroom directly? And does she believe that encouraging more outdoor learning, for example, can also be a helpful tool in helping to mitigate these harms?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank Fulton McGregor for his question, and I think that I hope, Presiding Officer, that when the changes come into force, we will find that disruption in the classroom is lessened, concentration in the classroom is heightened, that teachers will find themselves more able to conduct their professional duties without distractions from phones. And I also hope, as I said in response to another question, that this will be part of that wider public health approach which challenges, I suppose, some of the real intensification of children and young people's use of the online world in recent years. And Philton McGregor's point on outdoor learning is absolutely right. There is nothing like getting outside, exercising or just spending a bit of time in nature to remind all of us that the online world is not the real world. And there is a real world out there and it's to be enjoyed.
Jenny Young, to be followed by Don Black.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement today? I'm very glad the SNP have shifted their position on this issue. As a former French teacher myself, I know the huge level of disruption and distraction that phones can bring into our classrooms. But I also know that my former colleagues are under immense pressure with rising violence in schools and an ever-increasing workload. So what assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give that teachers will be properly able to contribute to the consultation without piling ever more duties on our overworked teachers?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I would want to assure Jenny Young, first of all, to thank her for her insights, and I'll add her to being another teacher whose input I'll look forward to getting in this role. But I would want to assure her that the views of teachers are absolutely central to how we develop this. And I've listed the range of stakeholders that we already have been working with on the development of the guidance and that we will continue to work with as we develop the legislation. Look, violence in our classroom is something which I and the government is concerned with, and I want to work with. I'm attending the EIS AGM on Thursday in Dundee, and I expect to discuss this with them then. I've no doubt that really bold policy changes like this can have a big impact on the question of behaviour in the classroom. Again, not just because of that disruptive tendency of phones, but because of what we know our young people are absorbing when they're online on a really repetitive and addictive basis. If I have time, Presiding Officer, I would just reflect that people have been talking to me about starting social media accounts with a completely blank canvas, and very quickly the algorithm is sending them countless images of young boys engaging in violence and highly sexualised content of girls. So that's what we're dealing with here, and we need to arrest that.
Don Black, to be followed by Kayleigh Kinross O'Neill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Introducing phone-free classrooms will provide greater consistency across Scotland, but can the Cabinet Secretary speak further on what exemptions might be made within the national ban, particularly for pupils with additional support needs, disabilities, medical conditions or caring responsibilities where they need access to technology? Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. And yes, in response to Don Black's question, I'm very pleased to, again, that guidance that my colleague, the former Education Secretary, developed had exemptions at its heart. It is essentially a strong statement of intent, but with those exemptions to take into account the instances where they'll be needed. They are explicitly in the guidance: medical exemptions, exemptions for young carers. There's also an exemption for staff-led learning activity on digital devices, and I'll be discussing the extent to which they'll need to be carried forward and reflected in the legislation. And again, reading the James Gillespie policy that they had produced, it was very clear, very concise, and it had explicitly within it that exemptions would be considered on a case-by-case basis.
I call Kayleigh Kinross O'Neill, and a final question from Marie McNair to follow.
Thank you very much. The Cabinet Secretary has outlined existing guidance which gives schools the power to ban the use of mobile phones with the government's support. While we look forward to reading the proposed bill, we believe the emphasis should first be on placing trust and resourcing teachers to do what is best for their own classrooms and ensuring that guidance is implemented as uniformly as possible. Could the Cabinet Secretary please outline how children and young people from across the country will be effectively and meaningfully consulted with beforehand, especially those, as has already been mentioned, those with additional support needs? Thank you.
Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Kayleigh Kinross-McNeill for her question. I would begin by saying that trust is absolutely vital, and we absolutely trust our school leaders and our teachers to lead this. That's why the Deputy First Minister's guidance put them front and centre of this and put our support behind them. But support is also vital, and as I've reflected, we are hearing calls for increased national support that will now be provided. Ms Kinross-McNeill is absolutely right to remind us of the importance of children and young people's views in all of this. That is absolutely central to the UNCRC and our belief in getting it right for every child. They have already been engaged with the development of the guidance, and I give her an assurance that that will be front and centre to how we take forward the legislation. I think it's also worth saying, however, Presiding Officer, that as adults in society, we also have an obligation to act when we believe that something is harming our children.
Thank you. I call Marie McNair, and we actually do have a bit more time, so that's to be followed by Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I take this opportunity to welcome you to your place and also congratulate the Cabinet Secretary on her new appointment. The vast majority of Scotland's pupils are hard-working and well-behaved, but we must also acknowledge concerns about the antisocial behaviour occurring in our schools. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise how introducing phone-free classrooms can contribute to the efforts in promoting positive relationships and behaviours supported by the Relationships and Behaviour in Schools National Action Plan?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I would reflect to Marie McNair, whose question I associate myself with, that I was speaking to a guidance teacher recently who said to me that almost exclusively she begins her mornings dealing with emotional upset or turmoil in either one or a number of young people's lives from something that's emanated from the online world, whether that's communications between pupils or something that they've seen and can't get out of their heads. So I think we all just need to reflect on the fact that this situation has really intensified very quickly. Technology is ever evolving, and we will have to be really nimble as we seek to grapple with it. And we should take clear but always proportionate responses to these issues, and empowering young people, empowering parents and carers, and supporting our teachers and our head teachers to implement what's right for their schools.
Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We're all aware of the negative impact that mobile phones can have on young people, from bullying to disruption and violence in our classrooms. And of course, the Scottish Conservatives have been calling for a ban on mobile phones in classrooms for quite some time. So does the Cabinet Secretary accept that teachers, parents and pupils have waited long enough for this action? And does she understand that some might feel frustrated that instead of acting now, today we have yet another consultation that could be kicking the can down the road?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would just reflect to Megan Gallagher that the law in Scotland is as it stands, and the government's position has long been that we can't unilaterally make implement the policy nationwide without a change in the law. And as has, I think, been reflected, the development of guidance, the co-development of guidance that's gotten us to this point has been a really helpful preparation for the next step that we will take together. And I would also say, in response to Megan Gallagher, she is absolutely right to highlight the difficulties and the potential harms of the online world, as I have. We also need to remember that navigating the online world can provide communities for certain young people, can be an outlet for their needs in life, but they won't be able to navigate it well and get the benefit from those areas unless we help to protect them from the harms, which is exactly what we'll do.
I call Willie Rennie.
Legislation to control the use of mobile phones in schools is certainly a welcome step, but can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to look further at the use of digital devices within schools? Because there is a growing body of parents who are concerned about the unregulated use, not based on the best practice and best evidence. So can I urge her to look at that and potentially including that in any legislation that's coming forward?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank Willie Rennie for the question, and I certainly would be very interested to engage with him on that growing body of concern that he spoke of these digital devices being unregulated. I think that there is a distinction to be made between personal mobile devices and digital devices which are provided by a school, which will often have firewalls and other technologies which mean that you stay squarely focused on whatever the learning outcome of the use of that is. However, as part of the consultation of this legislation, I will seek to understand more about those concerns about a lack of regulation. I am very keen, however, Presiding Officer, given that this is about helping the learning environment, that we're not removing tools that help teachers to further our young people's education.
I call Jackie Zimbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Previous Scottish Government guidance over mobile phones in schools was developed by listening to not only the voices of head teachers and school staff, but also listening to our young people. And I believe it's crucial that we continue to engage with those affected. So will the Cabinet Secretary outline any plans to consult with our young folk on the planned changes that she is proposing?
Cabinet Secretary.
Jackie Dunbar is absolutely right, Presiding Officer. The principle of meaningful participation is absolutely central to the adoption of a children's rights-based approach and is a general guiding principle of the UNCRC. So we are currently developing our approach to engagement with children's organisations to ensure that children's voices are heard as part of the consultation process. And we have rightly, Presiding Officer, focused on children and young people today, focused on our pupils, focused on our school environment. I think it does bear saying, however, that as adults we could probably also all benefit from thinking about our social media use and the distinction between the online world and the real world. And I often reflect that I might like it if someone took my phone off me for 6 hours a day. But we will stick to the remit of the task in hand with our education and learning environments, and perhaps adults can learn a thing or two from young people.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Apologies to members that I couldn't bring in the time we had allotted, but we now move to our next item of business, which is a debate on motion 208 in the name of Marie Todd on the Summer of Sport. I'll give the front benches a few moments to change over.